Soft Matters. Talking physics, talking life. Today on The Physics Factor, I have the pleasure of interviewing my own advisor, Professor Paul McEuen here at Cornell. Thank you, Paul, for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So I think the whole group knows that you love physics very, very much, but I at least don't know how you got started in physics in the first place. So why physics?
Why physics? It's a great question that I'm not sure I have a good answer for. But I've always liked physics since, when I would read books when I was a kid. I loved science in general. I read encyclopedias. I would pull out the letter A and I would start reading it. In particular, anything that was technology or science or anything like that, I would linger over. I really, really enjoyed reading it. And when I was a little bit older, I actually sold a bicycle in order to be able to buy a telescope.
That's awesome.
I got it, and I watched the stars for a little bit. And then I got bored, and then I took the telescope and I aimed it at like bugs, and that was much more interesting. And so then I decided I should be working on small things rather than big things.
Okay, well that answers my question of why you're not an astrophysicist.
There you go.
So for most of your career, actually, you've been working with carbon-based materials, so carbon nanotubes and graphene, which have been very hot topics in our field. And how did you know that that was something that you wanted to study? Was it just you had a natural interest in the physics happening in these materials, or did you see interesting developments that you expected to kind of explode? And
so obviously I saw the entire future of the field laid out before me with my incredible insight. The true story is much simpler. The simple thing was that we had figured out some fabrication techniques to attach electrodes to almost anything that was small. And we were looking around for some new things to attach electrodes to and measure them. And we'd heard these rumors about these really neat new long skinny materials, carbon nanotubes, and we said, hey, that would be a fun thing to attach electrodes to. And so we contacted the group that grew them, and they sent us some, and we put them down and we wired them up and we started measuring them, and they were really interesting.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history. Yeah, there was no more to it than that.
Can you comment a little more about this technique that you guys developed?
Yes, so it was a very simple technique that we used, the standard lithographic processes of the day, which is basically if you have something that you want to contact, let's say imagine you have a flat surface where this object is sitting, you spin what amounts to floor wax over the top of it. You then use an electron beam to draw where you want the electrodes to go. The electron beam chews up the floor wax into little tiny bits. You then dissolve that away, and you've left a lack of floor wax where you're then going to a little trench, exactly. And then you evaporate metal. You basically deposit metal on top, and then lift off the rest of the floor wax, leaving behind the parts where you had opened up the holes. And so that was the technique that we were developing using Ebeam lithography. And the only thing that we had done that was different was realize that if you threw something small down on the surface, you could go ahead and spin the floor wax over it and do all these processes, and it would stay put, stuck to the surface during this whole process. And when you were done, you'd have your electrodes and the things attached to it.
Okay. So I know in your free time that you like to write and work on thriller novels, and for those of you that don't know, Paul has actually published a book, Spiral. If you could comment a little bit about how being a scientist has helped you work on a completely new talent, which is writing a novel, which is no small feat.
So it was really interesting once I started to write. Why I decided to write is another story, but once I started, I realized that writing a novel is not unlike doing science. You don't really know where you're going, you're trying out new stuff, and you're going to fail more often than you're going to succeed. And so scientists are really good. It's good training for novel writing because it's another one of these long-term projects and you're not quite sure how it's all going to work out, but you just keep trying various things until something works.
You're kind of stumbling through the dark and eventually it kind of clarifies.
Exactly. And you're willing to do that for many years sometimes before it all works out.
And did any of your science that you do at work influence the science that's in the book?
Oh, absolutely. One thing, there's a famous quote that says you should never do anything in which you don't have an unfair advantage. And so I decided to write a scientific thriller, both because I like scientific thrillers, but also because I knew some science and I could bring my day job into the book. So there is a lot of science that's sort of tangentially related to what I do. And I think I slipped in the nanotubes in there in one little spot. But I also took this as an opportunity to explore things I didn't know about. And so in fact, there's a lot of fungal biology in the book.
Now, you mentioned that why you started writing was a different story. Would you mind sharing that with us a little bit?
Sure. I think, well, the simple version is I was, turning 40, midlife crisis time. I needed to shake up my life, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. I was happily married, I didn't want a sports car, and I didn't want to become a dean, and so I decided to write a book. And I think the reason was, once you get busy as a scientist, starting, say, as a grad student and later as a postdoc and a professor, you stop reading fiction. You stop reading for pleasure because you're just too busy doing other stuff. And this was my way of sort of recapturing my inner reader. I was a huge reader as a kid. And so this was, basically, if you're going to be a writer, you have to be a reader.
Right.
So now when I read a thriller novel, it's actually work. And it really it makes it even more fun to read. And it makes you, if you read a book that's really good, that really does its job right, you're just in awe of the writer. You know exactly how hard that is. Right. Not unlike doing science.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. I remember a book that I read that had a big impact on me. A teacher gave it to me when I was young. It was Marathon Man, which
I think I've heard of that one.
It's a very famous thriller, and also was in a movie starring Dustin Hoffman and Sir Laurence Olivier. It's one of the classics of classic movie and classic book. And it's a thriller, it's a straight up thriller, and it really got my attention. And I remember that even more than I do most of the science fiction I read at that time. So I think even then I was...
There was something about thrillers that were just exciting.
Correct.